So welcome. Today we will cover the fifth part of the second Anuvaka, which is the transition from Vijnanamaya to the Anandamaya kosha. And today's session is in two parts. So in the first part, I will do the translation and the explanation of this particular Anuvaka, which talks about the transition from Vijnanamaya to Anandamaya. And then in the second half, Val is going to lead us through the comparison to neuroscience. Like, how do these koshas and this whole idea of consciousness fit in to how neuroscience sees it. So she's going to try and map the two. So the second half of the presentation will be what Val leads us through. All right. So these are the references which we study each session before we present. And in some cases, the references, if they're direct quotes, are attributed directly with the name of the author. And in other cases, we imply it. But these are all the references that we've used. Questions. So just as a way to orient you to what we're going to talk about today and for where we might pick up. So these questions kind of direct your mind. So the first one is, as we move from prana to manas to vijnana, the layers become more and more subtle. Which layer do you find most difficult to observe in yourself and why? Second question, when these three sheaths are misaligned. So for example, prana is flowing freely, your energy is high, but your mind, manas, is distracted, and your judgment, vijnana, is clouded. How or what can we do to bring them back into harmony or alignment? First, what do you notice? Do you even notice that all of this is misaligned? Right? High energy, but your mind is all over the place. You're not making right decisions. Do you even notice when you're in that state? And if you are, what do you do? How do you align them? Third question, we often experience a reflection of bliss in deep, dreamless sleep. Why is it that we feel refreshed after deep sleep, even though we weren't there? Right? Your ego and your thoughts are not active during deep sleep. Yet, how do you come out of it and say, I have slept well? Because the ego has not been awake when you're asleep. Finally, is consciousness something that the brain has or something that the brain does? So it's like the chicken and the egg. What comes first, right? Is consciousness a product of the functioning of the brain? Or is consciousness innate? Is that the field in which the brain functions? Okay, so that will be covered 3 and 4. Listen to Val's portion of it for the answers. All right, let's start with a very brief summary. We're in the Brahmananda Valley, which emphasizes that Brahman is Ananda. Okay, the first Anuvaka said, the nature of Brahman is Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam. These are the three qualities or the characteristics. Where is the Brahman? In the cave of the heart, situated in each individual as the Atman or the self. Then we talked about how the unmanifest aspect of Brahman, or the manifest aspect, is as Jagat, the universe. And what's the story of evolution? From space to air to fire to water to earth to plants to food to man. That's the sequence. Then we talked about the fact that man is made up of the 5 koshas: Annamaya, Pranamaya kosha, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, and Anandamaya. And so these verses are telling us that they start to peel the 5 sheaths, one layer at a time, to get to the Brahman hiding in the cave of the heart. We first talked about the Annamaya kosha and said that's the physical body made of food. All creatures are born of food and return to food. Pranamaya, or the vital force, is inside this Annamaya kosha, and it's the breath body. It is the life of all because it is a vital bridge between the gross body and the subtler mental, emotional bodies of the Manomaya and the Vijnanamaya. So the Pranamaya kosha is called the life principle and the functional regulator of the entire physical system. The Manomaya kosha, or the mind sheath, is the psychological layer. Your thoughts, your emotions, sensory perceptions, and most of us live and draw our sense of identity. Our ego sits here. Then the Vijnanamaya kosha, the sheath of the intellect. This is where you have the faculty of discrimination, logic, willpower, decision-making. And so the next verse, Anuvaka 2.5, talks about this Vijnanamaya kosha and transitions to the Anandamaya kosha, which is the deepest sheath. So let's talk about this. Vijnanam yakya tanute, karmani tanute apicha, Vijnanam devaha sarve, brahma jeshtam upasate. Vijnanam brahma chet veda, tasmat chetna pramadyate, sharire papamana hitva, sarvan kaman samashnute iti. Vijnanam. Now we're talking about the Vijnanamaya kosha, right? So Vijnanam is the agent. He, with this intellect, this intelligence, yagyam or sacrifice, tanute performs, apicha karmani tanute, also performs the deeds. Sarve, all, devaha, gods, Vijnanam, intelligence, jeshtam, or the firstborn, the preeminent one, Brahma, Brahman, iti upasate, worship it as, the gods worship this intelligence as Brahman. Kaschit, anyone, even though it's not part of this, Kaschit is kind of a transitionary word here. Vijnanam, intelligence, Brahma as Brahman, Chet, if, Veda, comprehends, contemplates, knows, Tasmat, from that, Chetana, if not, Pramadyati, they don't swerve from that knowledge, Saha, he, Sharire, in this body, Papamanaha, sins, Hitva, having let go, having abandoned, Sarvan Kaman, all desires, Samashnute iti, thus attains it. The meaning is that knowledge, the intellect, the knowledge of that intellect performs sacrifices and also the deeds one performs. So even though you might be the one performing this yajna, it is your intellect that guides you to perform this yajna and karmani, all the deeds. All the gods worship knowledge as the firstborn or the eldest. If a man knows knowledge as Brahman and never swerves from it, he attains all desires and comes to abandon all the sins of the body. So it elevates Vijnanam, or the intellect or knowledge, to the position of the firstborn, the highest. Two quotes from Swami Chinmayananda. It says, addressing the first one, knowledge performs sacrifices and also the deeds. He says, without a correct knowledge of not only the rules of the karma, but the full significance of it, ritualism has no effect at all. Therefore, the Rishi here says that it is the intellectual faculty that is the true performer of all rituals. Right? So you go to the temple, you go through or you have your, daily rituals, purification rituals, rituals of prayer. What the Rishi here is saying is, the same rituals done with an understanding of the significance of it has meaning. Without understanding what you're doing, it doesn't have meaning. And what is that part of you that creates this understanding? It is that intellect. That is the knowledge they're talking about here. And for the second half, what does it mean to say that he who knows this knowledge or worships this knowledge as Brahman attains all desires, and abandons the sins of the body. What does that mean? So in relation to that, Swami Chinmayananda says, a fully awareful existence, at once intelligent and conscious, is sure to take us from success to success, and to such a vigilant individual, there cannot be any sense of frustration in his desires. So it is, if you live at this level of awareness and knowledge, and not just at the levels of the thoughts and the emotions and your sensory stimuli, if you're living and operating in this world through this layer of consciousness, Swami Chinmayananda says, you will move from success to success, and there can be no frustration of any desires. What does that mean? Does that mean you're going to get everything that you want? Probably, but what you want is going to change. Let's look at this commentary. So the Vijnanamaya kosha is the bridge between our physical existence and the ultimate reality of the Brahman. So the verse explains the intellect as the firstborn of the soul's manifestations, the highest point of human consciousness. Neither spiritual nor material life can function without the guiding light of the intellect. It is the conscious faculty that decides, directs, and executes every movement of our lives. To know this Vijnana as Brahman is to recognize our ability to understand and discern that we are the spark of the divine. By identifying with a higher intellect rather than the ego, one sheds sins or evils, which are simply the cravings and attachments of the physical body. Attaining all desire doesn't mean getting everything we want. It means reaching such a state of wholeness that no desire remains unfulfilled. We become one with the source of all joy, and our wants change. You are no longer running after that which your senses are directing you towards, your thoughts and your emotions. Operating at this level of the Vijnana, your whole orientation, your thinking, your prioritization, everything changes. And so it says, while we live in this physical body, it is our Vijnana, the intellectual, intuitive faculty that allows us to transform mundane work into a sacred offering. By meditating on this inner light, we transcend our physical limitations and experience the infinite nature of Brahman. So the question is, where am I coming from? Am I acting from my emotions? Or am I acting from my wisdom or intellect? Or I think maybe the better question should be, how often am I operating just at an emotional level or the level of the thoughts that control me? Or am I really acting from a place of wisdom? And a reminder from the Upanishad that relates the intellect to the charioteer who controls the reins of the mind, which in turn controls the horses, the indriyas, the sense organs. Intellect determines and directs the movement of the individual. Okay? And it is this layer that distinguishes a human being from an animal. And interestingly enough, that line in the middle that says the God understand the intellect to be Brahman, Swami Chinmayananda, all the commentators interpret it exactly as that way, the Devas. Swami Chinmayananda says the Devas in this case are the sense organs. If you believe that the sense organs are paramount, and if you only are taking the stimuli from the senses that you get from the senses and working it only with the brain, that is a hedonistic individual completely devoid of wisdom, right? You need this wisdom to control the mind, which in turn controls the senses. So there's a difference between somebody who's just reacting, operating, just on their emotions versus somebody who's more thoughtful, somebody who's more present, somebody who's more conscious. Okay, so this now it follows a familiar pattern. It says, Tasya eva sharira atma yaha purvasya. Asya, of that, esha, this, eva is indeed, sharira, embodied, atma is the soul, yaha purvasya, of the preceding. So now it's telling you, it says this Vijnanamaya is indeed the embodied self of the preceding self, the Manomaya. So we talked about the Manomaya, Annamaya kosha. Within the Annamaya kosha is the Pranamaya kosha. Within that, the Manomaya. Now it says within that Manomaya kosha is this Vijnanamaya kosha. This is the embodied self of the previous one. This again is a familiar pattern from the other four. Tasmat by etasmat Vijnanamayat Anyontara Atma Anandamaya Tena Esha Purna Sava Esha Purusha Vidha Eva Tasya Purusha Vidatam Anvayam Purusha Vidaha. Tasmat by, from that indeed, etasmat, from this, Vijnanamayat is of the intellect. Anyontara, there is another inner Atma or soul. So from that Vijnanamayat, now we're changing to the next one. There is another inner Atma or self. Anandamaya, consisting of bliss. Tena, by that, tasya, this outer self that we're talking about, this Vijnanamaya, Sava Esha Purna is truly filled. Purusha Vidha Eva, it is of a human form. Tasya, its Purusha Vidatam, its human form, Anu, depending upon Ayam, this Purusha Vidaha. So it says, just like all the other sheets, it says it also takes a human form, right? And the human form of the Vijnanamaya kosha continues as the human form of the Anandamaya kosha. So it says, as compared with this self made of intelligence, there is another self within it made of bliss. By that, bliss, is this, the sheath of intelligence filled. What was that earlier, the Vijnanamaya kosha, is from now on the Anandamaya kosha. It also has a human form. The human form of that intelligence sheath continues as the human form of this, the bliss sheath. Okay? So now we're being introduced to the Anandamaya kosha. The suffix Maya in the Anandamaya kosha is being referred to as the conditioned Brahman. So even this Anandamaya kosha is not the Brahman, but the condition or the qualified Brahman. That is, seeing Brahman through this material shroud of Maya or avidya. So even the Anandamaya kosha within you is a material shroud of the true Brahman even within it. So the Ananda or the bliss that you experience in the Anandamaya kosha is still a conditioned response to avidya, coming from avidya or Maya. So the causal body is referred to as the Anandamaya kosha. Let's talk about the soul. What then is this Ananda? If the Anandamaya kosha, Ananda, bliss, Maya, shrouded in Maya is what we experience. What then is bliss? The human experience of bliss arising from our sense enjoyment also comes from that inner source of bliss. However, the blissfulness of the self is not the kind of happiness we get from eating a good meal or winning a prize. Instead, it is a state of pure, causeless peace that exists deep inside us, regardless of what's happening on the outside. It is the closest a human can get to experiencing the divine while still being human. So even though the bliss you experience in this Anandamaya kosha is not the true bliss or Ananda of the Atman, it is the closest we can come to experiencing that Atman. And how do you get there? We uncover it by quieting the other four layers. When do we experience it? When we are in a deep, dreamless sleep. You wake up feeling refreshed and you don't know why. Your thoughts have not been active. Your emotions have not been active. Your ego is not guiding you. That deep, dreamless sleep is an experience of Ananda. When you're totally absorbed in a moment, like looking at a sunset where you seem to disappear, you are one with what you're watching or observing. At the peak of meditation, where the chatter of the mind finally stops and you're able to experience that deep, divine bliss. The experience of sensory bliss which we experience is further categorized by the rishis into three. Now understand this Anandamaya kosha is still a conditioned bliss. The origin of it is that true bliss of the Atman within you. But in the Anandamaya kosha is the closest you can get to that. in this level of consciousness. And then the Rishi says that conditioned bliss has three parts. So they're able to grade and qualify that bliss in the Anandamaya kosha. Tasya priyameva shiraha modo dakshinaha pakshaha pramoda uttaraha pakshaha ananda atma brahma pucham pratishta tad apyesha shloko bhavati. So just like we've talked about the right wing and the left wing, Anandamaya kosha also, it uses the same analogy. Of that bliss, priyam, joy or love. For example, when you see an object that you love or desire, that is priyam. That is the head. Modha, delight arising from possessing that object. Dakshina pakshaha is the right wing. Pramoda, elation arising from the enjoyment of that object. Uttara pakshaha is the left wing. So, love or joy is the head. The right wing is delight from possessing it. I got it. Elation at the enjoyment is the left wing. Ananda, Atma, the core experience of bliss is the central body. Brahman, the absolute reality. Pucham, Prathishta, it is the tail that supports, that provides the foundation. Tad api esha shloka bhavati. Regarding that also, there is a shloka. Okay? So the meaning of this is, of this bliss form, priyam or love is verily the head. Moda, rejoicing, is the right side. Pramoda, delight, elation, derived from the sensory pleasure, is the left side. Ananda, or the bliss, that objectless pleasure, is the trunk. And the supreme Brahman is the tail that stabilizes it. And there's another verse about this. So the anatomy of bliss. Love is its head. As I explained, when you see something you love. Joy, when you actually acquire that object or that experience. Pramoda, the intense gratification experience when one is actually enjoying that object. And bliss, the fundamental state of happiness that underlies all specific joys. Brahman as the tail and support. With respect to each kosha, we've had the same analogy, right? So what is the tail or the grounding factor in each kosha? Food is Brahman to the body in the Annamaya kosha. Prana is the Brahman or the foundation in the Pranamaya kosha. Mind in the Manomaya kosha. Intellect is Brahman to the Vijnanamaya kosha. And pleasure is Brahman to the Anandamaya kosha. Transcending all these secondary Brahmans or Anatman, we now come to the absolute Brahman or Atman, who's the support of them all. For this reason, Brahman himself is made the supporting tail of the Anandamaya kosha. By being the support of this kosha, it becomes the ultimate support for all the other koshas as well. Okay, so we've gone through this table last time that Ashokan put together. So we will only talk about Ananda, the Anandamaya kosha, and the Brahman. We will be introduced to that next one. So what's the essence of the Anandamaya kosha? Causal bliss. Okay? And the Brahman is pure being. Mode of existence, it is causal, latent. The Brahman is self-existent, doesn't need a body to exist. It is existent. Degree of subtlety, causal. Brahman is beyond the gross or the subtle. Dependence, the Anandamaya kosha depends on the Brahman. The Brahman is independent. Change, apparent stability in the Anandamaya kosha. The Brahman is changeless. Awareness is experiential but unmanifest. And that awareness itself is Brahman. The self-sense of, in the Anandamaya kosha, you say, I feel blissful. Brahman realization, I am. There is no I feel, there is just I am. Ethical dimension, desireless rest, source of all value. How does it relate to karma? This Anandamaya kosha is the seed of karma. Brahman is beyond karma. Relation to experience, it is experienced as fullness. Brahman is never experienced. It is the experiencer. Limitation, Anandamaya kosha is finite. When you die, the Anandamaya kosha is also gone along with it. Whereas the Atman is infinite. Bliss as a state, bliss as nature. And what is the na iti that we've been going through? In the Anandamaya kosha, bliss is experienced. Brahman cannot be negated. That's the final. The Anandamaya kosha is the final sheath or the cover or the shroud. Whereas Brahman is the tattva, it's a reality. There is no shroud. It is when all the shrouds have been peeled away. Okay? And the Brahman is eternal or always remains alone. So, as a transition to the next bit, I will summarize. We're now moving from the Vedic description or the Upanishadic description of the koshas to say, what are the correlates in the physical body before we move into the neurological correlate. Annamaya is the physical or the food body made up of your muscles, organs, and bones. Pranamaya is your vital or life force. It's your autonomic nervous system, your breath, your circulation. Manomaya, mental, emotional. It's from the limbic system, sensory processing and memory. Vijnanamaya, intellectual wisdom in the prefrontal cortex of your brain, guiding discernment, ethics. Anandamaya, the bliss or transcendental, and this is an interesting one, understood as the state of Anandamaya is experienced in the pineal or the pituitary glands, deep stillness or samadhi, and Val will talk to us a little bit more about that. All right. So when we move to 2.6, we go from Anandamaya to the Atman. The negation ends with Anandamaya. The na iti ends here. Where do we go from here? We enter into the limitless realm of Brahman in the next Anuvaka. So that's the first part of this session. In the second part, we will talk about bliss and neuroscience and the correlates between the two. And with that, I'll turn it over to Val.
Thank you, Ranjini. So, the science behind bliss, the neuroscience. So, next, Anuvaka is going to talk about Brahman. So, we thought we will go through the neuroscience behind this. So, Brahman is not a location in the brain. It is the consciousness that allows the brain to function. So, Brahman is the foundation upon which even the experience of bliss happens. So, now we can understand this with the analogy. If the brain is the hardware and the koshas are the software, Brahman is the electricity that powers the entire unit. Without the electricity, the hardware and software are inert, useless. So, here, the nervous system, the brain and spinal cord is the hardware. The Pancha koshas are the functional layers of the software. And Brahman is the field of consciousness in which entire system operates and everything happens. So we'll go through the nervous system, the koshas, and connecting the Brahman. So in the next slide, the hardware, the central nervous system and spinal cord. The central nervous system is the primary command center. The brain and the spinal cord, as we know, protected by the skull and the vertebrae. So the illustration on the right, as you can see, the brain, the most complex organ, it has divided into many regions. First one is cerebrum, as you can see on the top, the most responsible for higher functions like a touch, vision, hearing, speech, reasoning, and emotions. Whatever it happens in the sense organs, it is transmitted there. So the body is mapped in the brain. Next, the cerebellum, as you can see below. that coordinates the muscle movements and maintains our posture and balance. And then the brain stem, you can see the medulla, where the pons midbrain, it acts as a relay station connecting the cerebrum and cerebellum to the spinal cord. It controls the autonomic functions like the breathing and the heart rate. Then, now the spinal cord. This thick bundle of nerve fibers that transmits the signals between the brain and the rest of the body. It also manages the spinal reflexes, which are immediately responsible that occur without involving the brain also. So now we'll go to the Panchakoshas, the software, the layers. The Upanishad, the human being is described as having 5 koshas, the sheaths that covers the Atman. So as Ranjini described, the Anandamaya kosha, the physical sheath, it is the anatomical body that has the muscle, bone, organs that is sustained by the food. Then Pranamaya kosha, the vital sheath, this is the physiological layer. This corresponds to the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic, which is compared to the Pingala and Ida Nadi in yogic terms. The autonomic system manages the prana or the life force through breath and circulation. So that is the science behind the yogis with the breath control. They control the circulation. Like Krishnamacharya, the father of modern yoga, he had the ability to stop his own heart for a few seconds. That's how they manipulated the prana, the breath, and did that. Then the Manomaya kosha, the mental sheath, which is the lower mind. This is the limbic system and sensory processing like emotion, memories, and thoughts. So far, these layers, the Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, we can relate, we can see, we can kind of understand all this. But the upcoming sheets, the Vijnanamaya and Anandamaya is hard to relate. So the Vijnanamaya kosha is the intellectual sheath, that is the higher mind, or the discernment or buddhi or discriminating part of the brain that discriminates the right and wrong, good and bad, and decision making. This corresponds to the prefrontal cortex, as you can see in the illustration, where we make decision and engage in self-reflection. And the function of the PFC is like listed there, like empathy, insight, emotional regulation, morality, intuition, all these comes from the prefrontal cortex. This is the intellect part of it, the Vijnanamaya kosha part of it. The PFC is the last part of the brain to fully mature, so roughly around age 25. This delayed development explains why teenagers may excel at complex tasks but still struggle with risk assessment and impulse control. So almost all mammals have this prefrontal cortex, though it varies significantly in size, structure, complexity across in different mammals. Human has the better developed PFC of all mammals. Then we come to the Anandamaya kosha, the Bliss sheath. This relates to the third eye, mainly associated with the pineal gland and pituitary gland. When these centers are activated through meditation, they facilitate the release of neurochemicals like serotonin and melatonin that induce the profound stillness and causeless joy that happens in the Anandamaya kosha. This subtlest layer is experienced in deep sleep, samadhi, that is the reflection of the Atman. That bliss happens during this. So now the alchemy of bliss. So the body with all the endocrine organs, it produces so many chemicals, hormones, neurotransmitters. So when we move into the Anandamaya kosha, the bliss sheath, we are essentially optimizing our brain chemistry to reflect the light of Brahman without distortion. The neuroscience is a complex and evolving. The neurotransmitters involved in bliss. These are the main transmitters, as you can see in the list. The neurochemical GABA, that plays as a calming that quietens the mind, the chattering mind. Then the dopamine, that shifts from reward seeking to the joy of being. Then the serotonin, which is produced 90% in the gut and 10% in the brain. That's why the sattvic diet they encourage, which provides the diet promotes the sense of peace and contentment, the sattvic diet. Then the melatonin secreted by the pineal gland, essential for the deep sleep, and then meditation states. Then the endorphins or Anandamaya, the bliss molecules, that is named after the Ananda, that creates the sensation of causeless joy. Then now we will go through the special focus on the Anandamaya, the bliss molecule. This is named after the Sanskrit word Ananda. Anandamide is an endocannabinoid, a chemical our body produces naturally that targets the same receptors as the THC, the tetrahydrocannabinol in cannabis. This Anandamide or the bliss molecule breaks down quickly, but during deep meditation or during runner's high, the levels stay elevated. It creates a sense of profound peace, reduces fear, and induces a state of flow where the boundaries of the self feel less rigid. So now we are coming to the Brahman. So we went through the hardware, software, now the Brahman, the source, the consciousness. So while the nervous system processes the information, the consciousness is the light that allows that information to be known. So in an individual consciousness, the Atman. So in neuroscience, this is often debated, and it is an emergent property of the brain. Whereas in yoga, it is the witness, the sakshi, that observes the thoughts of the Vijnanamaya kosha, the prefrontal cortex. Then the Brahman, the ultimate reality or universal consciousness. The Upanishads teach the Brahman is the Satyam, Jnanam, Anandam. So to conclude, the connection is, if the brain is like a bulb and the koshas are the glass and filters, Brahman is the electricity. The bulb, the brain doesn't create the electricity. It simply provides a medium for the electricity to express itself as light. So now the modern science, we often try to fix the body and brain with the external chemicals. The Upanishads teaches us that through the koshas, meditation and breath, we can manipulate the internal chemicals located in the body and brain for the joy, peace, happiness. So to conclude, Pravrajika, she says, where the psychology ends, the philosophy starts. Where philosophy ends, the spirituality starts. So with this, I'll hand over to Ranjini to add and take us to the question.
Thank you so much, Val.
Thank you.
It's really helpful to understand, the hardware, the software analogy, and then I really loved, what you said at the end about the brain is like a bulb, koshas are the filters, and Brahman is the electricity. I think it's a very helpful way of correlating everything that you just led us through. It summarizes it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll end with the questions. Again, I don't want to repeat all of them, but the first one is, as you move through all these layers, it becomes more and more subtle. And then when you think about yourself, what do you find is the most difficult to observe? Like when you're in that layer, you're not aware that you're in that layer. So which layer is the most difficult for you? And second, when all these three sheets are misaligned, the prana, high energy, distracted mind, clouded judgment, what can you do to bring it back into alignment? Third question, We often experience a reflection of this bliss in deep, dreamless sleep. Why is it that we feel refreshed after deep sleep, even though we weren't there? Our ego was not involved. So, how do we come out of it saying, I had a good sleep? And finally, the part that Pal just led us through, is consciousness something the brain has or something the brain produces, something that it does? Okay, with that, let me stop recording.